All right. So welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone for attending our third event this semester as part of the West Lecture and Visiting Poets and Writers series here at Brevard College. I would like to thank the Humanities Division and English program at Brevard College for their support of the series and all of you for attending this evening. As a matter of courtesy, please ensure that your microphone is off for the duration of the reading, and you can turn off video during the reading if you wish. During the Q&A session, please type your question into the chat, and if you wish to read your question aloud, you may raise your hand and unmute. My name is Elise Bensel, and I am an assistant professor of English at Brevard College. Tonight, we virtually welcome visiting writer LaTanya McQueen. First, for the schedule of events, Dr. McQueen will read from her work, and then we will have time for a Q&A session. But before the reading, I will be introducing Erin Butts, a senior in English with a concentration in creative writing, who will be introducing Dr. McQueen. So take it away, Erin.
All right. Yes, I'm Erin Butts. I just wanted to welcome everyone to our reading and Q&A with the author of our book we read, When the Reckoning Comes. That would be Dr. LaTanya McQueen, obviously. I was given the privilege and opportunity to introduce Dr. McQueen tonight, so I'll take a few moments to brag on her and all of her accomplishments. Dr. McQueen's stories and essays have been published through many different publications, such as the Florida Review, Bennington Review, Passages North, Black Warrior Review, and as well as many others. She received her MFA from Emerson College and her PhD from the University of Missouri. She was the 2017-2018 Robert P. Dana Emerging Writing Fellow at Cornell College and is currently working as an English professor focusing on creative writing and African American studies at Coe College. And I believe I'm speaking for not only myself, but for my classmates as well. Reading When the Reckoning Comes was very fantastic. There's the element of horror, Southern Gothic, and a classic whodunit murder case, which had kept us all interested as we would break down the chapters from week to week. I can't wait to see what comes next for her, and we'll be looking forward to reading the next novels that come from her in the future. So, without further ado, I'd like to gladly introduce Dr. LaTanya McQueen.
Thank you, Erin, for that lovely introduction. You're making me a little homesick because of your accent. I grew up in Kentucky and my family's from North Carolina, so I'm missing home a little bit. Thank you, Elise, for inviting me. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and it's really nice to do these types of events and to talk to students. I'm going to read from my book, but and then we'll have the Q&A. And I always say to people, whatever you want to ask me, it's fine. If you want to ask me about publishing, you want to ask me about writing, you can ask me about my book. Anything is really fair game for me, especially because I guess for me, when I was a student, I always had all kinds of questions. And I was always somebody who I was always very insecure and never wanted to speak up or ask things that I wanted. So I try to encourage students really to ask me whatever they want, because I will tell you. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to read the beginning of the sort of, I guess, forward or prologue. And then I'm going to read a little bit from one of the chapters that comes a little ways in the book, or excerpts of it. Okay, and I'm going to read from the book instead of the screen. I've done both, but it seems sort of weird to do from the screen, so I'll just do it from the book. Okay. They are coming. In life, heavy was the crown of chains meant to keep their bodies down, but their spirits soon will rise. They are coming with their shackles, wearing them like armor, fuel that reminds them of their purpose. They bring the chains made from wrought iron, used across the wrists and ankles as they were stolen onto ships. They bring the iron collar placed on as punishment, its 4 prongs sticking out to keep them still. They bring the leg irons, 2 horseshoe-shaped rings cuffed around the ankles with a bar between. The metal once rubbed against their skin, causing it to bruise and break. They are coming with the branding irons shaped with the initials of the men who seared their flesh, forever marking them with their names. Their own names were taken, erased, but they have them back now. The iron is hot from the burning flame. The skin will flush red after, the dermis deep enough to easily slough off. What remains will be the mark of the men and women who once owned them. They come bringing tools to slaughter and maim. One holds a gelding knife. His hand tightens around the handle, ready to take. They're coming with the whip with its 9 knotted lashes. Their hands carry glass jars of what will be rubbed in after: turpentine, lime juice, hot brine, piss, whatever will make the flesh sting. Virtue you preached came from being beaten, redemption from blood. With the knotted whip raised high, you delivered your sermon. The strike of the lash cracking the skin, in return the faltering pulse. Nearby, they watched in the fields as you then held your son's hands, teaching your boys to practice the whip on the tree's flesh. Aim for the middle, you taught. Imagine the trunk is the space between the shoulder blades, the safest spot to do the most harm. They come wearing the clothes they died in, clothes worn day in and day out when they were alive. See the house servants with their cast-offs. They are barefoot, subjecting themselves to blisters and cuts rather than suffer wearing anything that would make them hotter. They wear quantiers, softened oxide cut to the shape of a foot and tied together with string. They wear the shoes bought by their masters. Children in calico slacks, men tipping their straw hats to the women as they moved further along. Women in their Christmas clothes, a few with ribbon tied in their hair. How long did you think, after all of this, it would be before their souls finally came for you in the night? These men and women remember. They remember the sight of their husbands and sons hanged from the trees they worked under. They remember the feel of the cold metal on their ankles. They remember the taste of it as the iron bit was forced in their mouths. They remember the taste of their own blood mixing with their saliva as it dripped down their faces, soaking what rags of clothes they wore. It is too late to speak of such stories now, for they are coming, ready to sneak into your rooms, tiptoe through the familiar hallways to find you and your loved ones in their beds. And maybe some of you will sense a shift in the air, something unfamiliar in the room. And maybe you'll open your eyes to see, catch a glimpse, but it will not be long, for make no mistake, they will not flinch, they will not hesitate. They have come for you, they have come. And as you open your eyes, the last thing you'll see is the axe as the blade strikes down. Do you see them hovering in the shadows? They are out there hiding in the thicket and behind the darkness of the trees. Hush, and you can hear. It's been said that on a quiet day in the woods, a sound can carry for miles. Although trees can absorb it, and there's also the thrush of branches against the wind, stifling what noise can be heard. In the summer, the sudden bursts of rain pound against the earth. Nature's inhabitants, the birds perched on branches, or the frogs with their mating calls, fill the woods with their croak and thrum, their whistle and pitter. During locust season, everywhere you can hear their high-pitched hum, making the air feel electric and alive. Late at night, there's the sound of dogs on a scent, followed by their last yelping howl. Hush, though, and listen. If you're quiet, you can hear their whispers in the water calling to those left behind. Hush, and you can hear them lurking, waiting for the day they can make their return. Kipson was mostly the same. She'd come across Antebellum Road, a nickname given to the area of historical mansions where the privileged few lived. The town was still deeply segregated, but this time driving through, the disparity felt more pronounced. As she drove, she saw more boarded up houses and more trash littering the gutters of streets. Mira passed a multitude of closed down businesses with the lingering signs of what they used to be. Not much remained of downtown. She saw a check cashing and payday loan store with its name glowing. Fast cash now, another sign flashed. The existence of poverty was palpable and unavoidable. The streets were filled with potholes, and despite Mira's efforts, she couldn't keep from feeling the jolts as the car bumped along. A new road had been built to bypass all this and take visitors straight to the Woodsman property. She'd seen the sign for the exit, and as she passed it, knew what had been done. Curious, after she'd driven through downtown, she circled back to find the exit and see where it would go. The road circled the periphery of Kipson. On this route, a bed and breakfast had also been built, most likely catering to those who wanted to visit the Woodsman place but couldn't afford the overpriced cottages. Branches hung low enough that she worried some of their leaves would scratch against the car. She came to a sign marking the Woodsman plantation, as well as an arrow directing traffic. A gate had been built around the entire property, except for a nearby parking lot built for visitors. The parking lot was full of cars with plates from all over the country, not just from the South, but from Texas, from Mexico. She saw a plate from Maine and wondered what kind of stories someone from Maine would come expecting to hear. As Mira got out of the car, a family trotted along in front of her, and she decided to follow behind. They looked like they were on vacation. The wife sipped from a large fountain soda, most likely bought from the gas station up the road. The husband and wife wore matching fanny packs around their waists. They had a daughter, a small child who couldn't keep up walking. So at one point they stopped and the father picked her up, carrying her the rest of the way on his hip. Mira walked behind them, although she made sure to keep a decent distance, all the while hoping they wouldn't turn around and see her, a Black girl in a crowd of white. People gathered and followed along the path. A busload of children emptied into the parking lot, and they ran past her, hurrying to beat everyone else inside. The chaperones called after them, and Mira heard their accents, German, and a profound sadness came over her at the realization that this place would be their only experience of this history. A whitewashed house and grounds cleansed of the lives of the slaves who built them. White visitors hurried past Mira to get their tickets to the Woodsman house. They skipped and trotted and bumbled along. It was a holiday experience for them, a vacation, maybe for some a celebration. They'd come to relax, to enjoy a little revelry, to escape. She was not like them. She did not feel revelry. Nothing about this experience relaxed her. With an unsteady gait, she took short steps, pausing with each one. Her stomach made little lurches, signaling to her the unsettled feeling that she might soon vomit on the grass. She did not want this. They wanted to be here, and she had to be, but did she? Should she have come? How could Celine have brought her here for this? Near the entrance, an elderly Black man sat in a cramped booth. He peered through the glass, glanced at her once to tell her the price before turning to the small computer screen in front of him. His ambivalence toward her, a Black visitor at a place like this, was a slight comfort that tempered her embarrassment. "Are there always this many people here?" Mira asked. The man focused on her again, this time surveying the area around her to see she was alone before he shifted up in his seat. "It's been pretty crowded since it opened a few months ago, what with all that's happened." He paused, rubbed his chapped lips together, seeming to debate with himself what to say to her. "I haven't heard," Mira told him, hoping he'd be urged on. "The man who bought all of this, Alden whatever, a couple months ago, workers found his body splayed across the grass in front of his house, his face all contorted, twisted up like. Wild dogs that got his entrails, leaving the remains scattered across that lush lawn he'd paid so much money for. They had to scare away the vultures hovering above, ready and waiting to swoop down for the rest of him. The story is his death was a heart attack, but try telling anyone visiting to believe that. Ever since, people have been flocking to this place, wanting to see if all those rumors are true. Gives them a thrill, I think." They exchanged a knowing look, and the man settled back in his seat. "I'm actually only here for the Honeycutt wedding," Mira said. "I'm not sure where I need to be. Do I need to go up to the house?" "Honeycutt? Oh yes, you'll need to go to where the cottages are. There's a check-in building. Here's a brochure with a map." "Okay." Mira took the brochure. The front advertised shows for a corn husking party happening in a few weeks. She opened it and scanned the inside. The brochure looked like it was for a theme park. Take a tour of the Woodsman house, and after have an authentic antebellum dinner, only $89.99, a caption read. Want to have some quality time? Take the kids to our playroom and have houseworkers Louisa and Mary watch them for the evening, another read. Brochure also advertised performance showings. A disagreement is brewing near the corn crib. Tom's caught Ben stealing a few ears. Will he tell? Shows every half hour. Witness reenactments of field workers showing the tobacco picking process. Slave driver Tom will take a break from his work to explain how he keeps his crew in line. There are reenactments in tobacco fields. I don't know who would want to see something like that, Mira said. Yeah, they're for effects, like all the reenactments. For effects, that's what this place is. All these stops have reenactments. The whole plantation is meant for people to take part in, to give an experience of what plantations were like. So you mean visitors go out and pick tobacco? No, nobody's doing anything like that. That's what they got the field workers for. You just watch. You can dress up too if you like. A few of the visitors do, wanting to feel a part of the show. Do you want a ticket for the park? You can see what I mean. Tickets are paid for as part of the wedding. No, Mira said, but changed her mind. Yes, actually. She took the ticket and left the booth to find the cottage. None of this is real, Mira reminded herself as she went through the park. None of what she saw was real. Alden had built it for show. Mira decided to walk around first. The property was overwhelming in its scope. Majority of the park was structured to be a replication of an actual antebellum era plantation, and all the workers performed their varying roles throughout the day as guests walked around and watched. The exceptions were the spirits bar that had been built along with the restaurant serving upscale renditions of Southern fare. Here was where the experience veered from its attempts at authenticity. A couple of photo booths had been set up where guests could take pictures dressed up in their own antebellum era outfits. A group of women dressed in their drop shoulder sleeves and hoop skirts laughed as they skimmed the photo strips they paid for. Along with photos, a music booth with a sign, "Sing Your Holler Song," marked the front. For $1, guests could sit in the booth, pick one of the listed field holler songs, and listen. Once they were ready, they pressed a button that would record them mimicking the lyrics. When they were done, they could play it back, hearing a call and response between the audio recording and the singer. I recognized the spot on the map for the big house, but there were spots for other things. The rows of slave cabins, the overseer's house, the gardens, the kitchen, the wash house, the smokehouse, as well as the tobacco fields. She went to the slave cabins first. A series of 8 newly constructed cabins were separated into 2 rows. The path was constructed such that a person could walk around the circumference of the cabins and stop to peer into each one as they read a corresponding sign that talked about the distinct features of slave life. One sign mentioned that the cabin's construction was made of cedar wood. None of the signs had names of any of the people who'd lived and died on the grounds. It had all been erased. A lot of money had been sunk into renovating the grounds with the idea that visitors finishing the big house tour would venture out to have a drink and admire the view. So a bar had been built along the back patio. Bar did not serve much, a few mixed drinks, bourbon lemonades, mint juleps. She made her way over, winding through the wrought iron tables and chairs. Mira heard a couple, having just gotten their drinks, affirm each other's decisions to order the rum punch. Young black girl tended the bar. While her frame suggested she was barely high school age, the way she manned the bar told otherwise, working with the careful ease of someone who'd been doing the job for years. The girl wore the same uniform as every other service worker Mira saw on the grounds, a short-sleeved black collared shirt tucked into tan slacks. Her hair was pulled tight in a bun at the nape of her neck. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, nothing differentiating or uniquely identifying her from the other employees. Mira watched her as she moved seamlessly between taking orders and making the drinks. She did each in batches to save time, ringing up customers first and shifting over to begin filling glasses with ice before pouring the bourbon. When it was Mira's turn, she noticed the girl had no name tag. It didn't occur to her until now the man she talked to at the booth hadn't worn one either. Mira asked her name. She gave a bashful smile in response. "We're not supposed to give our names," she said, but said hers anyway. "It's beautiful," Mira responded, and the girl smiled again before asking for her drink order. "A mint julep. It might be a couple of minutes. I got these other people first. Do you mind if I bring it to you?" "Sure," Mira said, going to an empty table nearby to wait. The girl at the bar continued to work. Not long after, she came over and placed a napkin down on the table with her drink. "Here," Mira said, handing her a couple of dollars from her purse. "I'm sorry, I almost forgot." The girl stared back in surprise. "Oh," she said, flustered as she held the wad of money. "Is something wrong? People don't usually tip. Thanks." She tucked the bills deep in her pants pocket and went back to the bar. When there was a lull, she walked around the porch, picking up the glasses patrons had left behind, moving swiftly to gather them before more customers came up to order. Mira sipped her drink. Looking around, she once again noticed she was the only Black person. She wondered if she was the only Black person in the hotel, if she would be the only Black person at this wedding. Most likely she would be. No, Jesse, there would be Jesse. He was somewhere, although she wasn't sure if she would recognize him. It had been so long. How much of her was still the same as the girl he had known? What would he think if he were to see her now as she sat on the porch sipping her mint julep? Would he judge her for participating in this way, however small? She judged herself, and yet she was thirsty and it was hot. Even sitting in the shade, the heat melted the ice, watering down the sweetness. She brought the glass to her lips and took a long drink before setting it down. She should leave, but sat for a little while longer, slowly understanding that Celine had ignored what this place was so she could have what she wanted. What must it be like to not see what Mira did, to have the privilege of such a choice? Around her, all the guests had settled into such an easy narrative without even the hesitation of a questioning thought. And Mira wanted to know how they were able to do it, to enjoy a moment like this, drinking in contented peace while admiring the view, to look out and say, "Oh, how lovely," and not think anymore beyond the perceived beauty before them. To marvel at the twisted limbs of the surrounding trees, their branches climbing toward the sky, toward their heaven, and not see lynching trees. To have their drinks served and not wonder how many of those working for them were the descendants of slave owners. They sipped their drinks and talked among themselves, undeterred by the history of this land. Bartender girl continued with her work, cleaning up after the messes patrons left behind, and Mira thought of all the workers she'd encountered as she passed through the grounds. Unnamed because they didn't need names to do their jobs, not to the people who'd come. Each one of them smiling and serving to everyone they saw, including her. The Black man who'd given her the ticket, the Black men and women performing their song and dance, the Black hostess greeting diners at the restaurant, Black cooks and buses and servers. They each had treated her the same as any of the other guests, and it made her question what her own role was in this place. She wasn't Celine, no, but she recognized her own privilege in the moment. She watched what unfolded around her and did nothing. And because of that, who was to say she was any better? The dynamic that had been created was not lost on her, this replication of what once was. And because of this, a deep sense of shame came over her. It had been there from the beginning, but the feeling clarified itself as she finished the last of her drink. She felt shame for participating, for coming and being complicit. She felt shame for the circumstances that had led to a place like this existing. Shame for the realization that even after all of these years of progress, this was where we'd come to this corrupted version of the past we all thought we'd left behind. Thank you. my dog was like snoring and I was so afraid everybody would hear.
Oh, no, I didn't hear the doggy at all, but that's great.
I was like, oh no.
Lulled to sleep.
It's like passed out, snoring like a person over here. I was like, oh God.
Oh, I love that. No, didn't hear it at all, but I mean, they're very effective, reading strategy for dogs. Say then, go to sleep. Thank you so much, LaTanya, for that reading and the choice that your selection from the novel. I really appreciated that selection and the kind of using the prologue and then when her first encounter with the Woodsman Plantation as tourist attraction. Those are excellent selections. Thank you for sharing. We're going to move into a Q&A now. I wanted to just open it up. Remember, as Dr. McQueen mentioned at the start of the reading, she is happy to entertain any and all questions. So if folks wanted to, feel free to type those questions into the chat as you're thinking about them, or you can also type and unmute and ask away. We have a good amount of time to entertain some questions. And as folks are doing this, I guess I'll just get started with a question about characters and characterization, because as someone who writes primarily poetry, I do dabble in other genres. Characterization is just such a fascinating technique that in poetry you get a little bit of, but it's so essential, I think, to most novels to have these different compelling characters. And in my class, we talked a lot about, the characters specifically of Mira, Jesse, and Celine, and how they interact with each other and their friendships and the breaking of those friendships and the reconciliation of them throughout the course of the novel. So I wanted to hear a little bit about how you go about conceptualizing your characters, how you kind of build them, and how you created this really complex relationship and relationships that we get between Mira, Jesse, and Celine throughout the novel.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm probably gonna answer it poorly. Because like when I don't know what it's like for you if you teach like multi-genre creative writing classes, but for me, whenever I'm teaching the students, and like characterization is the hardest thing I think for them, right? And it's hard for me too, and so. And it's one thing to sort of like talk about, right? Like, here are these steps for creating effective characterization versus like actually trying to, like, as a writer, trying to kind of do it and convey it. For me with this book, I struggled with it. And it was, I think when I did the revisions with my agent, it was one of the things that she kept bringing up, right? Like, so like, how does Mira, like, how does she respond in this moment? Why is she thinking about this in this moment? Like, really kind of like trying to kind of bring that out for me. But in terms of me and like how I kind of went about it, right? I was thinking about, I wanted to write a book about the white gaze, right? And I was trying to think about how it affects each of these different people in these different ways, and how it affects how they see themselves and how they see each other in this like core group, right? And all of their actions and their thinking processes are motivated by that understanding. And so that was sort of, I guess, the framework that I was working under. And then I moved from that. And so I'm working on another book now, and it's sort of a similar, like, I guess, a similar thing in terms of process, where it's like, what is this person's concern or issue or problem? And then what has led them to this like thinking, right? And then sort of building a story around it in that way. It tends to be how I like center it. I don't know if that's the best way, but that's how I went about it. But it is hard, right? And I think also too, right? Like, you have to like like voice, like my students struggle with voice too. And I think it's because they're interrelated, right? Like voice and character. You have to have an understanding of who your character is in order to even have like a specific voice, right? So, but anyway, that's how I went, that's how I went about it. That's a good question.
No, yeah, no, that's great because, we thought a lot about, these different characters and also how students like either saw, themselves partially, in a character or kind of not, and like trying to kind of navigate that. And I think in fiction, that's so important, like how you as a reader respond and navigate to those to these different characters and kind of their worldviews. And since this novel is for the most part, in this limited third person where we're just getting Mira's view, I still think, Jesse and Celine still come across very strongly. And as you were saying, and thinking about the white gaze and how they deal with that, or how that has affected the way that their course of action throughout the novel. Of course, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Like you don't know, it's so like rigid, and so you don't know like when to speak or how. I was gonna say, I get out because I do nonfiction too, and I get asked a lot. Like, so I was thinking about this in terms of character, and then like I get asked about like the distinctions, right, between two, and like how you kind of do one versus the other. But I was gonna say like one of the things that like when I talk to my students, right, like I think with like one of the things I think with students who write fiction as opposed to students who start with nonfiction, like you sort of like both students who are doing fiction and both students who are doing nonfiction, they're sort of starting in the same place, right? They're both writing oftentimes about personal experience, right? Like even in fiction, right? Like if you're like when you're taking like the intro classes or like the very kind of early creative writing classes, most of the time, right? Like you're still starting from your true experience. And the difference is, I think, with like fiction students, you learn a little bit quicker how, even though you're starting from your personal experience, whether it be like you're like a version of yourself in terms of character or like some experience that you had that you're sort of fictionalizing, right? You learn how to like take that next step, right, into fictionalizing, right, into thinking about like your past or aspects of your identity or people that you know, and learning how to see that as material, right? See that as story. And I think with like nonfiction writers really early on, it takes them a little bit longer to like, they get so focused on the truth of the thing, right? Whether it is their story or the like representing accurately whatever it is that happened or who they are, right? Like they get so caught up on that I think it takes them a little bit longer to see how to like take that same sort of the same sort of stuff and like think of it in terms of story. That makes sense, right? Like how to kind of narratize like personal experience. But anyway, I was thinking like your question made me think about this, right? Because this book, right, like these characters, I mean, there's traces of things in my real life and there's traces of like me in them, right? But it's still like fiction. But anyway, sorry.
No, that's great. Yeah, I just always think about characterization and really how we really thought about how these three characters, the way they shape the narrative, and also the way like we talked a lot about, character motivations too, especially in the decisions they're making later on in the novel and how that's affecting things. Like Celine's like her decision, of course, to have the wedding at the plantation, then Jesse's decision to kind of give her this information about the history and her, all of these different factors that come to the kind of culmination when the haunting, when the ghosts like collapse into the present, and Mira has these kinds of visions of the plantation in the 19th century and the slave revolt. So, there's a lot of really complicated things going on with history that I think the characters, really serve as really effective conduits in. So you're talking about that's really helpful. I could ask a million questions all day, but I also wanted to pause and give folks space to answer, to ask questions as well, because I love asking questions. And trust me, for students in the audience, when I was an undergrad too, I was so scared to ask questions. It just felt so intimidating. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, I should have asked questions. I don't think I started asking lots of questions or readings until graduate school, and maybe even then my PhD. So I really encourage you, you can just, what's great about Zoom is you can just type it right in the chat. And I will read it aloud as well if that's a little too much to ask the question, but I'll just do one awkward pause and take a sip of my bubbly, see if folks have questions.
I know, it's so hard because I'm I don't know, I go to Zoom readings too, and I'm I never want to do it. I just feel so self-conscious. I'm just like that in like daily life.
Yeah, it's a totally different scenario too. Yeah, it's a very different experience, kind of trying to do it on Zoom and getting the timing or kind of knowing when to ask that question. But are there questions from other folks? Or maybe folks who aren't students in the class but still have questions for Dr. McQueen?
Oh, this is a good one. I know people have questions, and then here we go. This is a great one.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Okay, yeah, so I'll read the question. What were your fears in publishing when the reckoning comes? And then what did you hope readers would grasp or worry they'd miss?
Yeah, that's a good question. It took me a very, very long time to get like a book out. It's been like 10 years. And it's interesting because I think like the longer it takes, in some ways you sort of, you said it like, like the longer it takes, the more investment you have, right? And like the more you feel like when it finally happens that all these things should happen, right? And so then it always sort of feels like a disappointment when it does, if that makes any sense, right? So you sort of build it up, and then when it finally happens, if it doesn't meet like these grand expectations that you have, then it feels like a little disappointing. I guess my fears, and then like, I don't know, like the book, I was worried, and I've continuously been concerned about like people misreading it, right? I think I worry again, right? Like, because I like I don't know, for me, and I don't know what it's like for you, but like I sort of feel like I see a lot of stories of like the people who write the debut novels, and right out the gate, they're like famous, right? And so it's like, it feels like there's like a lot of pressure if you don't live up to like, I don't know, this sort of ideal. And so I guess for me, my fear is that it would affect that it would affect writing another book, right? Like if you're a minority writer, if you're a marginalized writer, and like it was hard for me to get this book out to begin with. I got lucky in that I had an agent who knew what I was trying to do, and then I had a Black editor who fought very hard with the publishing company. They didn't want to take on the book, and she had to basically convince them to take it on. And it took a long time, like to try to get the deal. Because of that, she had to sort of argue for the book to be in existence, right? And so you worry that like, if it's not hugely successful, then you won't get another book. And then you worry about like the ways in which it's going to affect other marginalized writers in terms of getting a book deal, right? Like you worry about people reading it and misreading it. I was also worried for a period of like, I was worried about like people, like there was a brief period where I was worried about the response and like getting like threats. Because I've heard of like, I've had other friends who've written books that were controversial and they got backlash to it. That didn't happen, thank goodness, but so those are a lot of fears in terms of what do I hope readers grasp, right? Like or worry that they miss, right? Like or the grasping, I guess, like it's a book that's very much about the white gaze, right? And how it affects not just Black characters, but also too white characters too, right? Thinking about Celine and thinking about how her identity is wrapped up in how this particular group of white people see her, right? And I've worried that in conversations about the book that gets lost, and that people sort of center on the larger sort of premise of like slave ghosts revenge. And I get that, right? Like I get that from like a marketing standpoint, that like is exciting, but it is about that, but it's also too about these other things as well. And so that's been my concern. And some people do get it, right? Like some people have read the book and they get it right out the gate, and some people haven't. So that, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Like you just sort of have to just keep going. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Sarah, for asking that. That's a really good question.
Yeah, that's great. And Heather has a question about writers changing or revising a novel based on a writer's feedback group. And you could also think about this in terms like if you've worked with, groups or, friends or colleagues with drafts of the novel and also your editor. So based on that, was there anything you changed or things you refused to change, even with certain feedback as you were revising the novel?
That's a good question too. I didn't have a feedback writers group. I wish I did, but like I didn't have, like I wrote this book when I was doing a fellowship and I was at a nearby institution, and it was just me in a tiny room writing, and nobody had looked at the book until I wrote it, and I wrote it in 3 months, and then I queried for an agent. And that's not a process that I recommend anybody do, but I did it. And I had, in terms of like revise, so like nobody looked at it until I started querying. And I remember I had one agent who was interested in another book that I had written, but she wanted me to do all the stuff to it, and I said no. And then I sent her this book, and she wanted me to make these changes where like, so originally, like in this version, right, there's this sort of intersecting narrative of like the slaves, right, telling their stories, like the prologue, I guess, right, that's in a different type of voice. In my original version, like that wasn't in here really. Like the prologue existed, but like the other sort of narratives weren't in here. And one of the things that that agent wanted was like to have, so it was just the original story, right? And then the other agent, she wanted like the slave perspective. And then she thought maybe having it be like the ancestor point of view. And I didn't know how to do that. I couldn't do it. And then my agent, when she read the book, she said something similar actually, but like she thought maybe we could have like multiple slave perspectives in here or something, talking about like giving their story and giving like their revenge. And I didn't want to do I didn't want to like I didn't want to have it be like multiple. I just didn't feel like I could do multiple points of view effectively. But then also too, I think the way in which she talked about it, I was worried about going into stereotypes, I guess, of like revenge. And so I ended up in the revision, I ended up kind of deciding to do almost, it's not really a collective, I guess, but I ended up doing like the sort of slave perspective, talking about the past and what happened, right? Like leading up to why they had the revolt, right? But that came last, and it wasn't in my original version. And I wrote it all as like one sort of narrative. So it was like the last thing that I wrote in the book, and I wrote it all as one narrative. And then I went back and I sort of chopped it up and figured out where it could go in the book, if that makes sense. Trying trying to think of like things I refuse to change. I mean, you know, like even in the editing, like, you know, other agents read it and they wanted the same thing. They wanted more of a literal bloodbath of white people dying, you know, these pages and pages of this sort of thing. That's not what I was trying to do, and that's not what the book was about. And then some people, you know, they wanted, like, similar to that, like wanted more of like just hearing about the revenge, right? Or hearing about the past in this way that sort of made me feel like they wanted to hear like more about like slave trauma, you know. But I didn't want to do that either, so I don't know. But those are the things, right? So thank you for that question. That's a good question.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, just thinking, yeah, that editorial process and how complicated it is. And it's really interesting to hear about your experience with the other agent, right? About what that other agent won, and then your agent, and kind of negotiating that with the collective voice narrative. And that was something we picked up on right away reading. I was like, who's this voice in the italics? What's going on here? You know, and as that kind of comes in intermittently, getting that in bits and pieces, it, you know, also I think really mimics the way that Mira gets access through Jesse to the bits and pieces of history, and then finally kind of getting more, and then the visions give her the fuller picture. And it's really also interesting that people wanted more violence, essentially, and trauma. I feel like the ending, you get a good amount of that, and especially with the visions. I mean, it gets pretty brutal at the end. So I don't know. They wanted more, which is wild.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like, I think they wanted just like two things. One, right, of like seeing more of the visitors dying, right? So like these secondary characters dying, having that. And then I think in terms of the past, seeing more of like the slavery life as well. And I can understand their why, right? But that's not what I was that's not what I was doing, right? And it wasn't what this book is. But it does make me think a lot now about, I don't know if you've ever read like Percival Everett, what is it? Like Erasure. It's like the book that one of the books that he wrote, it's specifically talking about Black representation in publishing, and like there's like this narrative thread of like these books that are successful that like are sort of they're adhering to like stereotypes. And this writer in the book, like he writes these like weird, he's basically like personally, he writes these like weird sort of like types of novels that aren't like being beholden to that. And he becomes very resentful of these other Black writers who are sort of kind of doing what publishing wants of Black people. But I think about this a lot, right? And now in terms of like what types of stories become really popular, what types of stories I think get like heralded, get awards and stuff, right? It does sort of feel like it's certain types of Black experience.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Academy Awards and what happens there too.
Yeah,
There are certain Black experiences, particularly rooted in slavery, that get recognition, and publishing is no exception to that rule in many ways.
It's like that,
but
writing too, like women writing, like women can write about like the same types of experience about motherhood, relationships, right? And it's like deemed as women's fiction. But then you have like Jeffrey Eugenides, right, or Jonathan Franzen writing like these domestic types of novels, and it's seen as like super important literary novel that wins awards, right? It's the same type of thing. I noticed it a lot more now, I think, with the book.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, having a book out there, right, and seeing how it's being received and reviewed, and where it's being placed, you know, among other writers. Because you can never fully anticipate that, no matter what you do. It just happens how it happens. But thank you so much. You have given us so much insight into the novel, into your process. And it was wonderful to hear you read from the novel as well. Fiction readings are their own kind of flavor. And like I said, the selections you gave were just fantastic. And it was really lovely. So as a reminder, when the reckoning comes, if you haven't, I know many folks who are here have read the novel, but if you haven't yet, and Erin gave a wonderful summary about Southern Gothic, some horror, a little bit of mystery in here as well. My students did love the twist about Celine at the end. They were like, oh, some of them were really, I had them be like, what are your final reactions like? And that was something that they were really invested in one of those narratives. And I know we're really looking forward to reading more of your work in the future. So thank you so much, of course. And thank you to everyone for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.